All right, we will not be beatboxing the intro, unfortunately. So I'm sorry there. Welcome, everyone. This is, I think, the biggest crowd we've ever had, which tells me that's awesome. It tells me Mr. Bruce Schneier needs absolutely no introduction himself. The one thing I will say is congratulations to whoever lost their credit card at the security meetup. The first person to bring an ID with the name matching Jean Barmash to the front wins a free credit card. Yeah, just read out the digits. Absolutely. Yeah, this is not, yeah. To claim it, we give you a USB stick, and then you get the credit card back. No, the one thing I want to say is we are incredibly honored to have Bruce here. Is actually the first security talk I ever saw when I was 15 or something at DEF CON 8, and I thought it was the most amazing, incredibly intelligent talk I ever saw. And then Cult of the Dead Cow got on stage next and threw red meat at everybody, and I thought this security thing is going to be amazing. So with that as an intro, one other thing, we're doing our next Code is Craft talk on March 5th, I believe, and it is Brad Frost, and you should come check that out as well. So with that, Mr. Bruce Schneier.
The funny thing is that credit card wasn't signed, and so when I found it, I signed it. So hi, thanks for having me. Thanks for coming. I think I broke the fire code in this room, but let's just not tell anyone. So in case of fire, the door is over there, and you guys are good. All right, so I want to talk about trust. And trust is an interesting concept. Just this morning, I woke up in Minneapolis, got in at 5:30 in the morning, a taxi, which was a pretty impressive exercise in trust, especially given the ice on the roads. Got to an airport, passed hundreds, probably thousands of people, none of whom attacked me and took my money. Got on an airplane, not having any clue how the maintenance works, landed here in LaGuardia, a bunch of more thousand people, New York taxi, it's even more impressive. I mean, thousands of people I'm trusting. And that was before 10:30 in the morning. And when you think about it, we trust all the time. Trust is essential to society, it's essential to human society. We as a species are very, very trusting. I mean, it's kind of interesting. We're all sitting here and standing here, mostly strangers, and yet no one has leapt up and attacked the person sitting next to them. Right? You guys laugh, but if we were a room full of chimpanzees, this would be impossible. Right? We are the only species that can get away with this level of trust. And that actually is remarkable. Right? It happens naturally, it happens again and again, and society doesn't function without it. Right? It just collapses. And I think it's really a measure of how well it works that we pretty much don't even think about it. No one here drinking a beer is realizing how much they trust the company that made the liquid. You are not sitting here trusting the people who built this building however many decades ago. The ceiling's not going to fall on our heads. Or that the trains aren't going to derail, or whatever. Right? It just happens without us even thinking about it. So I want to talk about this notion of trust in society. And I think it's an interesting way of thinking about society, and I think it's a really interesting way of thinking about society's problems. I think there's a lot to be learned by looking at aspects of society through this lens of trust and mistrust. A lot of this is distilled from my latest book, Liars and Outliers. And, all right, so I guess what I want to talk about is trust's role in enabling society. So it's not really about why trust is important. I mean, there's lots of writings on that, about high trust societies and low trust societies, and how trust facilitates commerce and society. I mean, you could kind of all make that stuff up. And there's a lot of research on that. As a security guy, I more want to talk about how we make that function. Right? What are we doing here to ensure that nobody leaps up and attacks the person sitting next to them? Right? Or how we ensure that nobody steals anybody else's wallet, or whatever it is that's going on in this room. So it's a talk about how society enables trust. It's a talk about group. A way to think of it. It's a talk about group interest versus self-interest, and how groups enforce the group interest. Right? How do we as a group enforce the fact that what's going on here is I'm talking and you guys are sitting quietly listening? It doesn't have to be that way. I mean, 10 minutes ago it wasn't. Something changed and we all got it. That's fundamentally interesting. All right, so trust is a really complicated concept. And it's a word that's overloaded with meanings. I mean, when my book was finished and the publisher is trying to figure out a cover, what I often like to do in book covers is to make a cover that's indicative of what the book's about, with the title. And trust is such an overloaded word that every cover idea you think of just looks stupid. Right? But there's a lot of concepts on that one word. I mean, if you think about it, there's a personal and intimate form of trust. Right? When I say I trust a friend or I trust my spouse, I'm not talking about their specific actions. I'm talking about who they are as a person. I mean, I'm saying that I know this person and I know that they will behave in a trustworthy manner. Right? I know their intentions, and I believe their actions will be informed by those intentions, and I trust those intentions. Right? That's actually not the kind of trust I'm talking about. Right? When I got into the cab at LaGuardia, I didn't know the taxi driver. I didn't know his intentions. For all I know, he was a bank robber at night. But actually, I didn't care. Right? All I cared was for the space of our little transaction, which actually took longer than it should have, because it was snowing and the traffic was bad, he would behave in a trustworthy manner with respect to that transaction. Right? And he, at the same time, had to trust me that I would do the passenger part. Right? Go to where I was going and pay the fare. And I'm trusting that he's going to take me where I'm going without going through New Jersey. Right? So that's a much less intimate form of trust. I don't know them personally, I don't know their motivations, but I can still trust their future actions. In some ways, trust might be a bad word. It's more like kind of confidence. And maybe the cab driver is less being trustworthy and more being compliant. In another way, I'm reducing trust to consistency or predictability. Right? The word I like to use is cooperative. Right? In that cab driver-passenger transaction, we were both cooperative. We each had our part, and we played it. Right? In this speaker-audience transaction, we are all being cooperative. So in today's society, we have to trust, not only people, but institutions and systems. Right? I flew here this morning on Delta Airlines. Right? And I had to trust the pilot. But it's actually not really that I trusted the pilot. It's that I trusted that Delta Airlines has a system that produces, well-trained and well-rested pilots in cockpits on time with the right map or something. I don't even know how it works. Right? And it actually is really less that I trust the taxi driver, but I engines or whatever you guys do. Right? Also today I put my card in an ATM machine. Right? Trusting some abstract banking system. I don't really know how it works. That would give me cash and debit the same amount of money plus that usurious fee, right, to my bank account in Minneapolis. And that's a way of trusting a system. Right? We do this, of course, because that's how trust scales. I can't trust so many individuals. I have to trust them in groups. Right? So the group of of Delta employees, the group of airline employees, the group of cab drivers, the group of random people on the streets of Manhattan. All right, so all complex systems require cooperation. Right? All ecosystems require cooperation. This is true for biological systems. This is true for social systems. This is true for socio-technical systems. Right? None of them work without cooperation. Also, in any cooperative system, there exists an alternative parasitic strategy. Right? In any system of cooperation, there's an alternative strategy of being uncooperative. That's true for tapeworms in our digestive tract. That's true for thieves in a medieval market. That's true for spammers on email. It's true for companies that take their profits offshore to avoid taxes. So the word I like to use to describe these people, this is from game theory, is defectors. And if you recognize cooperators, defectors, and know any game theory, you immediately recognize I'm talking about the prisoner's dilemma, which I think is a really good thought experiment for looking at this difference between cooperation and defection and the relative costs and benefits to each. And I'm not going to go into it. There's a lot written on it. I recommend reading it. There are examples of it everywhere. You know, once you start learning to recognize the prisoner's dilemma, you can't stop seeing it. All right, so let's talk more about these defectors, these parasites. Parasites can only survive if they're not too successful. Right? This is important. If the parasites in your digestive tract get too greedy, you die and they die. Right? Too many thieves in a market, the market closes, no thieves. Too many people don't pay their taxes, you get grease. So there is this fundamental tension between cooperating and defecting. And when you think about it, that's a tension between us as individuals and us collectively as society. Right? So take an easy example. Individually, we're better off if we steal each other's stuff, but collectively, we're better off if no one steals. Right? Individually, we're better off if we don't pay our taxes. Collectively, we're better off if everybody does. And more to the point, we're better off if everyone cooperates except us. Right? Right? So it's good if I steal because I get your stuff, but I'm better off if I live in a society where no one steals, but I'm really better off if I live in a society where no one steals and I steal. Right? Because I get the benefits of living in a theft-free society, and I get your stuff. But the problem with that thinking is if everyone thinks that way, society collapses. Now, most of us don't think that way. Right? Most of us recognize that it's not in our long-term best interest to act in our short-term self-interest. Right? As humans, we get that. Not everyone does. And that fundamentally is why security exists. Right? That's why we need security and rocks don't. Right? Security is how we keep the number of defectors down to some acceptable minimum. And remember, an acceptable minimum does not equal zero. The goal in security is never to have zero defectors. It's to have some small number that allows society to function. Right? The crime rate will never be zero. But the crime rate gets too high, society starts falling apart. We've got to keep it low enough. And for every defection, right? There's some minimal acceptable amount of spam in the email, some minimal acceptable amount of tax fraud. Right? And we're always looking for that sweet spot. So, if you think of the chain, security is how we induce cooperation. That in turn induces trustworthiness, and that in turn enables trust. Right? That's the mechanism. Right? Security makes sure there are few enough crooked cab drivers in Manhattan so I feel safe taking a taxi. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, there are cities in the planet where you're told not to take a taxi. I was in Baku last fall. Actually, if you're ever in Baku, I'll give you the advice. There are two kinds of taxis. There are the London cabs that are painted purple, which is kind of neat, and then there are the sedans. As a non-Azerbaijani, you are warned to take the purple taxis. Those are the trustworthy ones. Don't take the sedans. I took a sedan, it was okay, but that's the advice. Right? So you're looking for security to keep that level low. So notice I'm not making any claims about the moral stance of society or the defectors. Right? These mechanisms are how a group enforces its norms. Right? The norms could be immoral. We could be talking as a group of criminals enforcing the norm of don't talk to the police. And actually, you can look at the security mechanisms that criminal organizations use to ensure that their members don't rat on each other to the police, and they look a whole lot like the same security norms that normal societies use to make sure that none of you speak out of turn. You mean we could have a society that is a slaveholding society, right? And the defector are the ones who try to free the slaves. So, think of this in terms of the group and the norms they're enforcing, less and not as some abstract good. I think it's easier that way. And if you do security, you know this, right? I mean, the same cryptography protects the good guys and the bad guys. We're used to security technologies being not amoral, but being apart from morals, right? From being just mechanisms that individuals use to protect their interests. So the mechanisms that society uses to induce cooperation, the phrase I use are societal pressures. And I like the phrase because it really is a pressure. Right? It's a way that we as a group influence individuals to respect the norm. I mean, sort of like in this room, right? The norm in this room is I talk and you guys sit quietly and listen. What's going to happen if one of you jumps up and starts singing? Right? I'm sure it's happened at a talk sometime. Or I guess more realistically, you jump up and protest, right? There's a Code Pink group right there. And they're going to protest something I'm going to say. Right? What do? Well, maybe we look at them funny. We try to convince them to sit down. Maybe we usher them out. In extreme cases, perhaps we call the police. I mean, you can sort of imagine the different things we might do, right, to enforce the group norm of one speaker, many listeners. So I have four basic categories of societal pressures. And you can argue a lot about the categories and how they fit, and just sort of these are the ones that I think are useful as a security person. The first one I call morals, and this is a very general term. By this I mean anything that comes from inside your own head. Right? Most of us don't steal not because we'll go to jail, but because we know it's wrong. Right? Feelings of guilt, feelings of shame, wanting to comply, wanting to go along with the group, respect for authority. I mean, there are a lot of pieces to this. It's a combination of innate and cultural factors, a lot of psychological research on where these comes from. There's neuroscience research on parts of the brain that are feeling these things and how they work. And we're learning a lot about this. But I mean, really, most of our compliance comes from inside our own heads. The second one is reputation. Now, this also comes from in our own heads, but it's very different because it's based on how others perceive us. Right? It's how we relate to others in our society. Basically, we get praised for good behavior, we get snubbed for bad behavior. Right? If a friend steals my sweater, I'm not going to call the police. I'm just not going to invite him over anymore. And if one of you jumps up and starts singing, we're all going to look at you funny, and you'll probably sit down. And if you do it a lot, we'll just get you out and put you on the elevator. We are sensitive to it in others and also to our own. We spend a lot of time grooming our reputation. The real definition of gossip, information about other people. There are language theories that's why language developed. Right? And humans are really unique. There are other species that deal in reputation. All primates, some mammals, certainly based on previous interactions. Right? They keep reputation. We are the only species that can transfer reputation information. Right? I can tell you about him. That's a big deal. Right? That allows reputation to scale in a way no other species can do. And I'll give you one experiment. It's actually a great experiment. I forget which university, but there was a coffee machine and an honesty box. And you know how this works. There's a coffee machine, and there's a box behind it, and you're supposed to take a cup of coffee, you put a quarter in the box. It's a great experiment to measure compliance, right? You can measure the amount of coffee drunk, you can count the money, and you know exactly how many people paid and how many people didn't. So what the researchers did, now this is just great, they put a photograph of a pair of eyes, I'm not making this up, behind the coffee pot. And the control was a picture of flowers. And they found that that photograph of a pair of eyes increased compliance enormously. Right? Just the reminder that you might be watched. I mean, you kind of know this, right? As we move further away from people, we tend to defect more, right? I mean, internet trolls happen more anonymously and more because there isn't face-to-face interaction. There's an experiment I'd love to do, this eyes experiment, to put it on banking websites, right? Because if it reduces bank fraud, it'll be like the best security measure ever. I don't know if anyone's done it, but I think it'll be interesting. So morals and reputation. These types of societal pressures are very old, right? They're older than humanity. And they really are, if you think about it, our primitive societal pressure toolkit. Right? That's what we had through most of our evolutionary development. When we're living in small family groups in the East African highlands, 100,000 BC, that's what we got. The problem with morals and reputation, both of them, is they don't scale very well. They tend to max out at about 150. Great research on why that number is so. I'll sort of leave it for now. Right? But the primitive stuff works better for small communities. It tends to fail as society gets larger. Right? Larger communities require delegation, requires dealing with groups instead of individuals. So you end up with some formalization. And you can think of law. You can think of technologies, right, as also allowing society to scale. And that's the third and fourth kind of pressure. Number 3 is institutional pressures. And this, I mean, laws. Laws, they're just the rules of the gang. And in a lot of ways, these are rules that have been codified and whose enforcement has been delegated. Right? Institutional pressures. There are two ways to it. And just like reputation, you praise people for good behavior and you stub cooperating, or you can impose sanctions on people who don't cooperate. In general, sanctions are more efficient. If you think of society, you've got like a 95% cooperation rate, I'm making this up. It's a lot cheaper to punish the 5% than to reward the 95%. There are examples of going the other way. I mean, tax incentives would be an example of rewarding cooperation. But in general, society tends to punish those who break the norms. Then, we're going to reward everybody who doesn't murder someone this year. right? That gets expensive. Right? And the fourth kind of societal pressure are security systems. And these are artificial mechanisms to induce cooperation or prevent defection, induce trust, compel compliance. And there's a lot of different things here. You can think of it as I don't know, door locks and tall fences, alarm systems and guards, forensic and audit systems, mitigation and recovery systems. Right? They're all acting on different pieces of the security chain, but they're all basically doing the same thing. Right? And in the real world, all this stuff works together. And again, think of stealing. Right? Most of us don't steal because we know it's wrong. Some of us don't steal because what will our friends think. Some more of us don't steal because we'll go to jail. And then some of us don't steal because we can't pick the door lock. Now, right, as a security engineer, we tend to spend all of our time up in this teeny slice. But it turns out that the whole gamut is important. And actually, in the past 10 or so years, there's a new field of crime science that looks at what they call situational crime prevention, which tries to integrate all of these things in a more sociological, comprehensive way of preventing crime, which is brand new and I think really interesting and I think very valuable. Because if you think about it, right, individuals have to make a cooperate defect decision. Right? You know, at the moment, it's should I steal or should I not? And in my own way, right, you know, not necessarily rationally, not with full data, I'm going to weigh the costs and benefits. I might do a crappy job. I might not get them the way you would objectively, but I'm going to do that somehow. And these societal pressures are how society puts its finger on those scales. Oh, I shouldn't steal, I'll feel terrible about it. Oh, I shouldn't steal, I might get caught and I'll be embarrassed. Oh, I shouldn't steal because I'll go to jail. I can't climb that fence. Whatever it is. Right? So society, you know, getting very broad again, uses these pressures to find some optimal balance between cooperating and defecting. And it really is an optimal balance. Right? We know that too many defectors is damaging. But too few defectors is too expensive. Right? There is some sweet spot. And that's determined, you know, organically by society. It's different in different cultures at different times for different things, but there is some balance. I mean, take crime. If there's too much crime in the neighborhood, everyone says, hey, there's too much crime in the neighborhood. We need to spend more money on police. If there's too little crime, people start saying, well, what are we spending so much money on police for? It's safe and we have these other problems we have to solve. I mean, we don't really make these trade-offs explicitly, but we do make them implicitly. So I think this way of looking at society has very strong explanatory power. You know, I'm not going to do it here. In my book, I talk about terrorism and the financial crisis and organized crime and internet crime. And I think it's really fruitful to look at them through this lens of cooperation, defection, and these societal pressures. And it's very multidisciplinary. In writing my book, I drew a lot. I mean, you can sort of hear the disciplines, right, from psychology, economics, and game theory, evolutionary biology, neuroscience, philosophy, anthropology, poli-sci, law, theology. You know, and what I, sort of an aside, I think is really interesting, that this is the kind of research that is not possible without the internet. And I remember when I was at a university, it's not that these journals were in different floors in my library, they were in different libraries. And the ability on the net to follow a chain, I mean, doing a keyword search in a theology journal is kind of interesting, and I'd never done it before. I would never have done it. And there's a lot of directions to take this research. I think there's a lot of complications here. You know, I've done some very strong simplifications. I mean, this whole group interest versus self-interest is really kind of simple. There are really, for us, many competing interests. And us as individuals and members of society is just one. I think of the conflict between us as a employee of a corporation and us as a member of a community. Or a family member versus a community member. There's a lot of work going on with different groups using societal pressures at the same time to induce different forms of cooperation. There's a lot written about the interplay between morals and reputation. If you think about this, they both evolved simultaneously. They're not really separate. They're very interwoven. You can argue that separating them makes no sense. And I gave a very simplistic definition of laws. Right? It's actually kind of rare for those in power to represent the group interests accurately. So what happens when the cohort in power produces rules that don't conform to the group interest, and how does that work? How do these different scale? I think scale is a really important aspect of security. I mean, this is natural scaling to some of them. Like morals and reputation tend to be very close. There are ways technology helps them scale. Now you think of, I don't know, the eBay feedback system is a really interesting example of a reputation system that scales. Yeah, and there are ways it works and there are ways it doesn't. Credit reporting is another way that we can get our reputation to scale. We can complain about it and it's got problems, but it makes a national, international type of banking possible that wouldn't be possible otherwise. There's a lot you can do on the effects of group decision making. I mean, I've been talking about individuals making decisions. Often it's groups making decisions and how that works. And also how this plays out in common groups, in corporations and government groups. So, I mean, I did all that in my book. I'm not going to do it here. What I want to do here, because I think it's more interesting for this audience, is how technology affects these things. We are fundamentally technologists. And technology, I think, has really interesting effects on security and society and trust and all these things. Because at very basic, technology allows society to scale. And that scale affects societal pressures. I mean, it scales in a lot of different dimensions. Right? More people, more complexity, new social systems, new security systems, increased technological intensity, increased frequency, increased distance. And if you think of, right, these societal pressures as causing some balance between cooperation and defection, technological changes upset that balance. Right? You had a perfectly normal society. Someone invents gunpowder, and all the rules go out the window. Right? We've all been doing quite well in crime, and somebody invents fingerprint technology, and now it all changes. So, and in response, society has to rebalance. Right? So you need new societal pressures, maybe new laws or new technology, or maybe some new group norm. Right? Maybe something that used to be not okay becomes okay. And this is an iterative process, right? It's hard to get it right, but basically it's how we get stability. Right? That's how society chugs along, even though technology is constantly changing things. So the problem with this model is that the attackers have a natural advantage. Now, some of it's just a first mover advantage, but I think it's more ingrained than that. In general, the unorganized can make use of innovations faster. I mean, if nothing else, they have no procurement process. I mean, let's say we invent the automobile, and the police say, "What a nice idea!" And they have a group to study the use of an automobile in crime fighting. They write an RFP. They go out for bids. They get bids. They choose a vendor. They buy a car. They have a training system. They figure out how to use it. Meanwhile, the criminal says, "Oh, look, new getaway vehicle," right? And can make use of it immediately. And we saw this on the internet. You remember in the mid-90s when suddenly we had internet commerce, and like within minutes we had a new breed of cyber criminal that appeared out of nowhere, knowing how to take advantage of it to commit fraud. Meanwhile, the police, who were like trained on Agatha Christie novels, right, took them about 10 years to figure it out. And now they have, and most right? Or when the internet first hit China. And suddenly everybody was able to read everything and Chinese censorship was gone. Well, now it's back. The government has finally figured out always going to have this delay, right, between when the defectors can use technology and when the organized, those we delegate to defend can use technology. And I think of that as a security gap. Right? This is natural advantage of attackers in this kind of system. And that gap is greater in times of more technology, and it's really greater in times of rapid technological change. Actually, rapid social change due to rapid technological change. And we are living in the world of A, more technology than ever before, and B, greater social change due to technology than ever before. And that makes it really hard to get societal pressures right. And I don't know how many people here do IT security. We're starting to see this realization. I think it's kind of interesting. And at the RSA conference last year, I started seeing more people talking about not security that will keep the bad guys out, but will help you deal with the fact that they've already gotten in. And I've heard it called reactive security and agile security. That's a bunch of different names for lean security, but the basic same idea. And it's how antivirus works. Right? We cannot predict the next virus, but we try to detect it quickly and push a signature out fast enough, right, so that we maintain security anyway. Right? It's no different than a herd of 500,000 gazelle on the African plains. Right? It doesn't actually matter there are 200 lions circling that herd. Right? The herd's going to do just fine. Right? Some individuals get eaten. Some of the people who've gotten the viruses early get whacked. But that is basically the early warning system for the group. Right? On the other hand, technology allows societal pressures to scale. Right? It's not all in favor of the bad guys. I mentioned the eBay feedback system, the credit reporting system, our credit scores, Yelp. All of these examples of technology-fueled reputational systems. In a lot of ways, you could look at writing, right? Literacy as a way to help moral systems scale. Right? Our ability to write our moral texts down in books that other people can read was an enormous advance in society. Right? Done through religion, but that's